Hi, Terry here, and welcome back to Times Gone Tech. Hey, let me ask you a question. Is this a really big knife or a very short sword? That's what I'm going to talk about today. This is the Spartan 300 sword on Amazon Prime by Honshu. And I just got one in a couple days ago, actually. I've been playing with it, testing it out. And today I'm going to do a quick little review, give you my thoughts and opinions on it. So stick around. So starting this review off, let me start with the box that it came in. Pretty cool looking, huh? Yeah, see, it's a bit of a problem with this. It is a very cool looking box. That means it's also kind of an expensive box to make. And who do you think is paying for that? The customer, of course. They're not going to give this to us. This is included in the cost of the blade, that is the amount that it took to get from the Amazon Prime warehouse to me in my hand. The cost of making this box was included in that. And I'm going to just throw it away. So kind of money wasted. Oh, before I get into this anymore, I do want to point out that, no, I'm not being Mr. Macho here. A button literally popped off my shirt while I was turning the camera on and getting into position out here in the yard. Same color as the grass. Who knows where the hell it went. I'm just too lazy to go in and sew another button on right now. I'll take care of it later. So kind of bear with that. So let's move on to a quick look at the scabbard that goes with it. I like this scabbard. It's leather. It's not that cheap plastic crap that they're making these days. And it's not fox leather. This is real leather. Um, Double stitched all the way around. Good heavy duty snaps on it here and here. The way this thing is designed, it's got two snaps. I'll show you that when I start putting the sword into it to show you. It's kind of a very interesting design here. It had a lanyard on it here that I cut off because I didn't like it at all. And it's got a spacer. You can see right there. There's a spacer piece in between these two outer pieces. So this is not two pieces of leather sewn together. It's three. And that's a pretty heavy spacer piece. And the only thing that I would think I could say that would make this better would be if they put a few rivets in it along the outer edge, just to stop the stitching. If it did start unraveling, it would only go to the rivet and stop, especially here and then back here. But you know, it's okay. I can live with that. Overall, I'm going to give this very good marks. It is a knife scabbard, if you're curious, and that does kind of tell us a little bit about whether this is a big knife or a small sword. It does hang down low on the hip. I'm going to get into all that when I put the two together. Um, yeah, we'll get back to this. I like it. And now on to the knife short sword itself. I'm going to judge this by the following criteria: fit, form, finish, and function. Another way to look at that could be appearance, and design would go along with appearance. Quality of materials, quality of manufacture, construction, and practicality. I mean, how well does this thing serve the purpose that it was intended to serve? And how good is it at that? So first, starting with appearance, which we could also call the cool factor. This thing is cool. It is cool looking. Yep, you got to admit. And really, you never want to undervalue the importance of the cool factor. It's not a major component in something, but in a weapon, but it is important. And this thing looks deadly. I mean, this thing looks like you could go into battle with it. And it just looks like something a warrior might have. But while it is called the Spartan 300, it has nothing to do with Sparta, Spartans, or the Battle of Thermopylae. No Spartan ever held a knife or sword in their hand that looked like this. It is modeled after, very vaguely, by the movie 300, you know, those black iron swords that they had then. But those were Hollywood fantasy swords. That sword never really existed throughout history. Yeah, the Spartans used swords, but it was very different. Um, this kind of sword never actually existed in history, as I've said. So if you're wanting to collect, you know, historic reproductions, that's a big minus against this particular blade. But it is cool looking. To me, though, it looks more of a futuristic post-apocalyptic warrior type look than an historic look. But it is vaguely reminiscent of the movie sword Spartan 300. Not really, just vaguely. Make that all caps, vaguely. But anyway, I'm going to give it high marks for the cool factor. This thing looks cool. Okay, now on to materials, quality of materials. The blade. The blade, first of all, is not stainless steel, not on this one. Now, it was advertised on Amazon as being made of what's called 7CR13 stainless steel. Now, that's a decent quality of stainless steel. I personally do not like stainless in a knife or a sword. It tends to be brittle. There are some very good springy stainless steels, and they're also extremely expensive. This particular sword, however, came in as part of their, if you can see that, D2 tool steel series. So this is not stainless steel. This is D2 tool steel. And on the other side, which I know you can't see, but I'm going to point it out, is stamped right here in front of the guard on the blade, the HRC hardness. Now that's just a scale or a rating of how hard the steel is after it's been hardened and tempered, the final hardness. And this particular blade I tested out at a range of 58 to 62. Now, to give you an idea of what that means, a typical sword will be hardened to between an HRC of 50 and 60. So this is really at the high end of ideal. You're getting up to where it's what you might want to use for a knife, which gives you another indication of what this maybe actually is. But tool steel is very good for knife blades and for short swords. It's a little heavy, a little dense for a full-sized sword, which is why you very rarely ever see full-sized swords like rapiers, Viking swords, medieval type swords, things like that, made out of tool steel. They generally just don't function well on a big, long object like that. But for a blade of this size, tool steel is good. It's not the best. The best would be something like a high carbon 1095 spring steel. This thing would get a 10 up rating from me across the board immediately if it was made out of 1095 spring steel. It's not, it's D2. That's going to cost it a little bit on the rating, but it's better than stainless. And it's not that cheap Chinese 420 or 440 stainless that's flooding the market. This is a good quality of steel. So that gives it good marks right there. It has fullers on both sides. These holes here not only also look cool, but they also affect the balance, which is, let me get it set up here, right there, which is very good, just ahead of the handle. That gives it just enough weight ahead of the balance point that it feels just a little front heavy for chopping, slicing, or stabbing. So it's got a good balance, it's got a good hardness, it's a decent quality of steel for the price. What else on this? Okay, this cutout here is not sharp, nice and flat. This is not sharp. This is not sharp here. The blade itself is hollow ground. Now that's both a pro and a con. Traditionally, both knife and sword blades would be wedge shaped. That means that they would come together into a V down on the edge. And so this would be flat across here, and it would come down into a V shape, right down to the edge. The advantage to that is it makes the blade stronger, puts a little more steel up here. It makes it a lot sharper. It makes it less susceptible to chipping along the edge during heavy impact and fighting. It's easier to make. The cons are that it's heavier. It makes the blade heavier, and it's harder to sharpen. You got to sharpen that entire bevel all the way down. With this being hollow ground, it makes the front of this blade lighter. It's got a secondary bevel right here along the edge where it's sharpened. That makes it easier to sharpen. It makes it, it's will slice better than if it was wedge shaped, but it does also make the very edge here a little more prone to chipping. But that's kind of countered with the material that's made of. That D2 tool steel is formulated to not chip easily. So kind of balances out there. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing that it's hollow ground, but generally speaking, knives will be hollow ground and swords will be V or wedge shaped. Another clue. It came in the box sharp. This thing was ready to use. It was not coated in all that heavy shipping oil. It had a very light coating of shipping oil. I've since put a very light coating of museum wax over it, which I'm going to go back and redo again because I've been out in the forest using it. The secondary bevel, again, it makes it easy to sharpen. A couple swipes on a sharpening steel, it's ready to go. And D2 tool steel has good edge retention. So not only easier to sharpen, but it's going to tend to stay sharp longer, even under heavy use. So you might think for stabbing, this is really thin through here, and you might think this tip here is going to be likely to snap off, but it's not, because you can see this has been beveled down. The spine, which is 3/16 of an inch thick, by the way, this sword is 3/16 of an inch thick. That's 3/16 of an inch all the way down to about here. Then it starts beveling down just a little bit, but it doesn't really get thin until you get right down to the very tip, right at that secondary bevel. So it's actually not going to chip off very easily. And even if it does, it'll be easy to resharpen with a file. Not that big a deal. Okay, so good quality of materials on the blade. It's also full tang. You can tell because it's got two pins, one here and one here. So you know the tang comes back to at least here. Talk about the handle here in a minute. This is not stainless steel, as I've said, which is a big minus in some people's mind because this thing will rust if it's not taken care of. You need to keep it oiled, keep some museum wax on it, something like that to protect it. And you got to get it out of the sheath and you got to look at it once in a while. Put this in a sheath, stick it up on a shelf, get it out a couple of years later, you might see a little corrosion on it here and there. Doesn't bother me a bit. Just get it out once in a while, play with it a little, and then oil it up, put it back away. Okay, the guard here is stainless steel. It's thick. This is not a wimpy guard. It's a nice, thick, sturdy guard. So it's got some good hand protection right here. My problem with it is, as a sword, this guard really sucks. It actually provides almost no protection for the hand whatsoever in a sword fight. Looking at it on the edge, I mean, look how my hand sticks out from that guard. Look how my thumb sticks out from it. And because of the design of the blade, I think in a fight, a person would have more of a tendency to want to block with this part of the blade instead of this part to avoid chipping the edge, right? This is going to be much less likely to chip because it's pretty thick through there. But all that really does is it brings your opponent's sword kind of dangerously close. Right at that edge. That edge is sharp. Kind of dangerously close to my hand, and it could easily come down and get that knuckle, come down and get that thumb. And I know that a lot of swords historically, Viking swords and others, had very small guards, very little hand protection. They also lost knuckles, fingers, and thumbs in fights. Their swords were longer and they tended to impact farther out away from the hand. But eventually, swords developed this big basket hilt guard all around the entire hand to protect the hand because hand injuries were common in sword fights. That's why the guards got bigger and over time and just kept growing and providing more protection for the hand. Now, as a knife, that's not a problem. Hint, hint. It's a good guard for a knife, not a very good guard for a sword at all. Okay, the handle. It is ergonomically designed with this little bit of a curve here to it that actually gives the hand, if it was flat and I was going to stab with this, my hand would be more bent than it is. So the wrist is really for a thrust. This little bit of a curve to it puts my wrist in a decent shape where I can thrust straight in and straight back. So ergonomics are good on the handle. It's made of a nice hard rubber, which does make it easy to grip. The pins are not put in under pressure. They're actually threaded. There's those little star-shaped threads, so the handle can be removed. This whole thing can be disassembled. I don't know how this guard is held on, but I beat on it with a rubber mallet hard, and it's still just as firm and tight as can be. So it may be welded back there, maybe spot welded. So it's not going to come loose is what that means. I've been banging this around a little bit over the last few days, and it's still just as tight as can be. So got a lanyard here, which show you the proper way to use a lanyard. You do not wrap it around your wrist. Bring it up over the back of your back of your hand, put your thumb through it. And that gives you a good grip. It's hard to get out of the hand for both thrusting and slicing, for chopping. Very little shock from the blade into the hand, some, but not much. So yeah, it stabs good, it chops, it slices good. Again, very little shock into the hand. Okay, getting back to the sword here, quality of construction. I want you to look at, I'll hold it where you can see it, right through here. Almost no gap whatsoever. Almost no gap whatsoever. So fit, form, finish, very high marks on this blade all the way around. Function. This is definitely a stabbing weapon. This is not a sword fighting weapon. Now, even if you want to call it a short sword, it's made for stabbing. It will cut. It's got a nice curved cutting edge here. It will cut, but it's not really intended for that. You can also block with this part, parry, but it's really intended for thrusting. This is a thrusting weapon, just like the Spartans would have. Stab. The reason is, back in the olden days, before surgery and antibiotics and stuff, a person could take a pretty serious cut, actually, and possibly still survive it. But you stab somebody in the middle of the body, a couple of inches in, and that's it. It's curtains for them. It's stage closed, lights over. They might not die right away, but they're done. So they had a tendency to stab more than cut. So that's why their blades were more straight. And this actually is pretty straight. If you take the curves out and just look down the fuller to the tip, it's actually pretty straight. The tip here is very good in alignment with the handle, hand. So yeah, it's a good stabbing weapon. If I haven't mentioned the word stab enough, it's a good thrusting stabbing weapon. Okay, let's get back to that scabbard. Okay, as you can see, this is a knife scabbard. It hangs down low on the belt. A sword would be up higher and would be angled. So this handle would be out about here for a cross draw. Or, like this is actually kind of a Roman style, because the Romans actually held their shields in their left hand and they drew from the right side. They didn't do the cross draw like they did later in the medieval period. It hangs down just past my knee. And, initially I thought that's going to be a real problem. I could just see this thing just, banging against my knee with every step that I take. And while it does very lightly tap my knee, as you can see from walking, while it does very gently tap my knee, it is a very gentle tap. And it's so light that I could actually forget that I'm carrying it. And I know this because the last 2 days I've gone on hiking trips with my dogs out into the forest, and I've worn this just to see what would it be like several hours at a time. And in both instances, I actually kind of forgot I even had it with me. So I'm going to increase my marks. My original score on the scabbard was not all that high, just because it's a knife scabbard. And this thing's kind of big for a knife, hanging down past my knee. Now, but it actually carries better than I expected. So Better marks for that. Okay, why two snaps? Well, that's because due to the shape of this, they had one of two choices. They could keep this thick and come all the way out here, which would look kind of dumb, and this thing would tend to rattle around in it, or they could cut it down following the curve of the blade. They chose to cut it down, which means it's open from here all the way back. So to take it out, you unsnap it and snap, and it comes right out. And it's actually easier to get in and out than I thought it would be also. Score. Because there's no rivets on this and because it had this lanyard here that I had to cut off, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to give this a 9. It's not bad. 9 for the scabbard. Okay. Fit, form, finish, function. For appearance, the cool factor, solid 10. Quality of materials, 9. Only way this would get a 10 is if this was something like a 1095 high carbon spring steel, which it's not. But it's still a hell of a lot better than that cheap Chinese stainless steel. So 9 for quality of materials. And that goes also for the guard and the handle. Fit, form, finish, 10. Solid 10. This thing, especially when you consider the price, which starting the price to get this into my hand, $200. Now, putting that in perspective, a good entry level price for a sword, let me say that again. A good price for a good entry level sword is between $400 and $500. Now that would be like a Viking sword or full size, medieval sword, $400 to $500. So $200 to get this in my hand. Considering that, I'm going to go with a 10. I mean, it's a good material. It's perfectly hardened, perfectly balanced, very well made. This thing could take a serious beating and keep right on going. So my final score, da, 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 on a scale of 1 to 10, 9.5. There's one more thing I haven't looked at though, and that was the initial question. Is this a really big knife or a very short sword? Okay, as a knife, it's too big. It's too far, the blade is just too big to be useful as a tool in a camp out in the forest. But, and I don't know if this was designed or if it's just something that I thought of on my own, the way this part through here has been cut down and this is not sharpened, I can always just choke up on it. And look, I've got myself a nice Bowie knife now. This is, I can cut, I can slice, I can stab, I can dig, pry with it. So yeah, again, I don't know if they designed it that way or if it's just something that I made up, but this could be a really nice knife. It could also serve as a hand axe because it's got enough weight forward to serve as a hand axe. As a sword, this would be very good in close quarters combat, like say an apartment complex corridor, hallway, stairwell, elevator, maybe. That's why I'm thinking post-apocalyptic fantasy type weapon rather than a historic reproduction. Out in the open, this is at a serious disadvantage against anybody with a longer weapon. That includes spear, a full-sized sword. This is a definite disadvantage out in the open. Like I'm out in here right now, this would not be a good choice. Inside a house, inside an apartment, or inside an office complex even, this gives you a definite advantage over a longer weapon. Now, just keep guns out of it for now. Let's assume we're in the post-apocalyptic days, all the bullets have been shot up, and everybody's back to hand weapons, okay? Yeah, in close quarters, where maneuverability is very important, this is a good weapon. Out in the open, this is not a good hand weapon, unless you can get in close to your opponent. So, is it a big knife or a small sword? Actually, it depends on what you're going to do with it and where you're at. It can be a big knife. It can be a short sword. It just depends. So, the Spartan 300, sold by Honshu. That's my review. I guess the only thing left to do is to kill a pumpkin and a watermelon with it. That never gets old. the, the Spartan 300 by Honshu. Thanks for watching.